before I get to showing you the board, I did want to talk a bit about um, the bad guy aspect of this. Now, here in this game, it's not as kind of clear cut as say U-boat leader, for example, because U-boat leader, if you recall from when we were playing that a few weeks ago, you're playing German submarines in World War Two, going out and sinking merchant ships and battleships and all this sort of stuff, and that's a little. I find it a little bit disquieting, shall we say? Because and I mentioned this at the time in the video for that, but there you're not really you're not the good guys. You're going out, you're sinking ships. There's merchants on them or sailors or whatever. Um, they're drowning, burning, etc. because of what you're doing. Um, it's not something that would completely stop me playing the game or something, but it's something I think shouldn't be taken for granted in a game, um, and especially war games. I mean, the whole point of the war game, to me, of a war game is that um, you're learning about the history, you're learning about the conflict, you're seeing what the situation was and kind of playing through it to understand it and so on the one hand. On the other hand, it's a game, it's a puzzle or a conflict between two or more people representing the sides and so on. But and it's a war game. Like, it's war. Bad things happen in war. Everyone pretty much does bad things. You know, it's I talk about good guys and bad guys, but in this, you have you're playing the German fighters stopping or trying to stop the Allied bombers from bombing Germany, and those bombers weren't just bombing industrial targets, although sometimes that was the idea. But they were bombing cities, villages, possibly to get to said industrial targets or something. But there was a lot of collateral damage. There was a lot of civilian damage. And like hundreds of thousands of civilians got killed in those as well. So who's the bad guy? I mean, overall, the Germans were the bad guys, right? They were the Nazi, the Reich. Um, but for this sort of specific thing, it's a little more fuzzy, perhaps. Um, but overall though, I'm still playing the bad guy's side. Um, so it's not that I mean, I've mentioned this on forums and things, and on my Twitter. I had a thing on Twitter the other day about this, but I'm not saying nobody should ever play the bad guys, or the bad guys should never be a faction in a war game or whatever. Like, that's just you wouldn't have a war game really. In that case, um, it does. It does. I am curious because there are quite a few. Um, there's quite a few solo games in particular where you're playing the German side. I mean, there are several games where you're not playing the German side as well. You're playing the Allied side, or you're not playing the Axis. You're playing the Allies. We've got U-boat leader, but we've also got Gato leader, which is the Pacific. You're playing U.S. submarines in the Pacific, trying to sink Japanese ships and so on. Again, that's a bit more of a. Is this? Are we the good guys there, or are we the bad guys? I don't know, because who are we thinking? Um, but you've got Skies Above the Reich, where you're playing the German fighters, and you've got um, what is it? Target for Today, I think it's called. You've got the B7. There's a B-17 game as well. Where you're playing the bombers. But it's interesting how there are these games where you are playing the bad guy side. Like, you know, like with U-Boat Leader, why wouldn't you have a game where you're playing the convoys or the battleships, trying to sink the subs or trying to avoid the subs? Why wouldn't you, you know, here in this case? I mean, there is games that do this, but instead of doing Skies Above the Reich, why couldn't we do, you know, Skies Above Britain, where we have the Battle of Britain? And we're defending Britain against the German bombers. I mean, they are actually apparently possibly planning on doing that. There have been hints. I think somebody is on the Skies Above the Reich Board Game Geek forum is actually doing a mod for that. That, you know, I don't know whether that will become an official thing or not. Hopefully it will, because I will be all over that. But, you know, it's interesting just that they chose this viewpoint when they could have chosen an Allied viewpoint. I don't really know what that's about. Like, is it just more gameable? You know, does it just translate better? I don't know. But yeah, it's an interesting little thing to think about, really. But that said, I don't have qualms or any major qualms in playing it. Where it gets me is that there's a bit of dissonance in achieving something, because in this, you know, if I shoot down bombers, then I'll be like, yay, I've now, I guess I've foiled those allies in you know, their attack on the German homeland. Good for me. But I'm not sure if I can, you know, feel quite as satisfied about that as if I would, you know, if I was playing British fighters trying to shoot down German planes that were coming to bomb England. You know, like it's a little bit more of a reserved sort of celebration of that, really, or satisfaction out of that. So yeah, it's a bit odd, but like I said, I'm not offended at the idea of playing it. Otherwise, I wouldn't play it. You know, like I'd be pretty hypocritical if I said, like, right, you know, I don't like the idea of playing Germans, and then here I am playing Germans in a game. You know, it's just a thing to keep in mind. Now, the other thing that's kind of brewed up lately on this topic is how the Germans and the Nazis and so on are portrayed now in modern media. Because there was an article in Vice about that's proven rather contentious. But the thrust of that is that, you know, the question they were asking was, are the Nazis being whitewashed in modern gaming? You know, because there is, I think, a certain kind of thing now where, you know, there's a lot of World War II computer games where you're sort of, you know, squad based, running around shooting each other things, you know, whatever, World of Tanks and War Thunder and Battlefield and so on. And they do seem to they don't portray the Nazis in really the light that they should be portrayed in, which is, you know, very unfavorably. Like, you know, they were nasty people. They still are nasty people where they're around, you know, but they're kind of made to be like cool in these games. I think, or, you know, the article was saying, and I think I would agree with that to an extent. Like, sometimes they are. You know, I'm not sure. I mean, I haven't played many of those games. I'm not sure whether you can sort of play as that side. I mean, that would be really, really dubious, I think. But, you know, they've been a bit sort of cartoonified almost. And I'm wondering if it's getting to the point where, you know, give it 100 years and maybe people will be thinking of Nazis like we think of pirates now. You know, like the Age of Sail pirates were all like, you know, stereotyped by going like "ar yar avast" and being, silly characters, whereas, in reality they were murderers and psychopaths. I wonder if there's this sort of dilution of what they really are that just sort of happens over time. I don't know, but one thing out of that did intrigue me was like the idea of using Germans and Nazis and so on in World War Two, or whatever bad guys in whatever conflict, to sell a game. Like if you put like I think they were talking about like a character in one of these computer games that was like a major, I guess, NPC or something, but he was really kind of being portrayed as this epic, cool kind of character that was, I guess, geared at bringing people into the game. And the wargaming part of this is that, of course, Germans appear in war games, and they appear on the covers of war games as well. And that is where I get a little bit, I think that's a little bit sketchy. Like there's a new game by GMT called The Last 100 Yards that has a photo of 3 soldiers on the cover. And it's digging around a bit. I mean, if you know your World War II stuff, you'd recognise it. But digging around a bit, it's 3 German soldiers wandering through the streets of Stalingrad in 1943 or whatever. Now, on the face of it, one could say, what's the big deal about that? They're not doing anything. They're not shooting anybody. They just, there's a guy standing there holding a gun. There's another one sort of doing this, and there's another guy in the background, and that's basically it. But it's still a really odd choice for the cover of a game to have, German soldiers who are invading a city, and they're not there on a holiday. They're there to kill people, civilians. They're there to drive them out of their homes, shoot them, bomb them, throw grenades at them, whatever. Like they're not there to do good things. So it struck me as really odd to use that as the cover of this game that didn't really have much to do with that. Like it's it's a small unit combat, tactical combat game, like sort of combat commander. So there's no real reason why you have to have a picture of a German on the cover, or any Germans on the cover. You could have just put like a combat scene generally, in a town, or you could have put like Allied soldiers on the cover or something. Like it's just weird that they would pick that. But the really interesting thing for me was asking about that on the GMT Games Facebook group, because it got a lot of hostile reaction just asking about that cover. Like, and it was literally, I was literally just saying, why did you use this picture? It seems a bit of an odd choice. Why didn't you use Allied soldiers? And within like half an hour, I had a whole horde of people coming out of the woodwork, really agitated at the fact that I had asked this question. And it was all sort of ranged from, I don't see a problem with it, to why are you asking? You must have some kind of agenda, to shut this discussion down right now. And very few people seemed actually willing to talk about it. They were just more threatened. They were so threatened by it that they just wanted to shout it down. And it was kind of eye-opening. I mean, it's not terribly surprising, I guess, given, wargamers tend to be a more conservative bunch, shall we say, in my experience. But there's definitely a lot of people who would just prefer not to think about any of that kind of thing at all, and who get hostile at the thought of thinking about that. I mean, maybe there it is. This day and age, things get a bit polarized and hot pretty quickly. It's it is a short step from why did they do this to, oh my god, it's completely wrong, it should be shut down, which I wasn't arguing for at all. But still, it was like it was really unpleasant. And yeah, there've been a few discussions about that subject that have got pretty heated on the Wargame forums, and were shut down pretty quickly because people just apparently can't keep a civil tongue in their heads. You know, they have to throw insults around the moment they see somebody who's asking a reasonable question. It doesn't reflect well on the hobby, and the people in the hobby. And I don't know if that's a cultural thing or what. Maybe like, I don't know, if a lot of people who play war games and who are online tend to be older, white American males or something that tend to be more conservative anyway, maybe that sort of reaction isn't surprising. But it's still not a good sign. I mean, I don't know what the reason for it is, but I mean, that's my theory. It's just the demographic. But it's not a good sign, and it's not good when the publishers as well don't really want to think about it either. I mean, granted, it's only been a couple of days, but there's been no response from GMT about it at all. I mean, they have, people have said that the designers are usually the ones that pick the covers, which is fair enough. But GMT didn't have to approve it. But I just don't know if the designer of like Last 100 Yards just thought, oh, this is an interesting looking picture, I'm going to use it, and didn't know or care about what the origin was, or whether he picked it specifically because it was German soldiers. I mean, one thing that people have raised, perhaps cynically, is that putting Germans on the cover of games sells, which again goes back to the whole like, hey, the bad guys are cool, which is not the case, and shouldn't be the case. But if that really is the case, that putting the bad guys on the cover sells more copies, then that's also kind of a little bit of a not a good reflection on the hobby, really, is it? So yeah, I mean, it's a complicated subject, to be sure, like, but it's something that I think needs to be talked about at least. But we've got to get to the point where people actually want to talk about it, without being shouted down or insulted or attacked or something by people who can easily just not talk about it if they don't want to talk about it, or can learn to talk respectfully about it. But this is the modern internet. This is what people do now. They shout at each other. So it's unfortunate. But that's a sort of it's like kind of two sides of the coin there, of like playing the bad guys, or having to play the bad guys in the game, and all the the things that entails, all the thoughts that entails, and having the bad guys, how the bad guys represented in the game. And it's just, obviously there's a lot more to it than that, but that's just sort of my thoughts on that for now. But I mean, it's a bit of a rabbit hole that you could go down, really. But again, like I said, I'm not against having the bad guys there. I'm not against people playing as the bad guys, but it's a tricky thing. Haha. Oh, it's what's this? Chrysalid Punk. Hello. Joining late from Hex Encounter. Yay. I saw the Facebook post. I think you are talking about. Good on you for raising it. Thank you. Yeah, I've had a few people saying like, good for talking about it when I mentioned it on Twitter and so on. So it's not like they're that I'm alone in thinking this. I think there are quite a few people out there who would agree with me, but there's obviously quite a few people out there who wouldn't agree with me as well, which is fair enough to an extent. You don't have to agree with me, but just do it. Don't be an ass about it, basically. I mean, I try not to be an ass about it myself. I mean, I know sometimes it doesn't come out too well online, but that's the nature of the medium. But I try to be not insulting and patient with people. But it's tricky.